The envelope felt heavy in my hands despite containing just a single sheet of paper. My husband's stern expression told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. This wasn't going to be a happy anniversary eve. I'm Elena, and this was the moment my marriage of 15 years shattered like fine crystal against marble floors. Well, aren't you going to open it? My mother-in-law Vivian's sugary sweet voice cut through the tension in our living room. She sat perched on the edge of our imported leather sofa, already wearing the diamond earrings Richard had given her moments earlier. The flickering candlelight from our anniversary dinner and the bouquet of roses on the coffee table felt like a mockery now. I carefully broke the seal, aware of 4 pairs of eyes boring into me. The lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Not exactly your typical anniversary dinner guest. I don't understand, I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I read the document. You're cutting me out of the will completely? After 15 years? Richard, the CEO to his father's company and husband who once promised to cherish me until death, didn't even look up from his whiskey glass. It's for the best, Elena. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. My choices. I laughed, but it came out hollow. You mean pursuing my education instead of playing corporate wife? Opening my own interior design studio while you were busy with acquisitions? Don't be dramatic, Richard cut me off. Your little hobby hasn't contributed anything meaningful to our lifestyle. Everything you have, he gestured around our penthouse with its panoramic city views, comes from Lancaster Holdings. My family's legacy. Vivian nodded approvingly at her son while my father-in-law Edward cleared his throat. The family business requires protection, Elena. Your independent streak has become concerning, especially given recent developments. I folded the paper carefully, my hands trembling slightly. The crystal chandelier lights reflected off the glossy paper, creating dancing patterns that reminded me of our first anniversary when Richard gifted me that chandelier. Back when our marriage meant something different. Actually, I stood up, smoothing my dress. I expected better from you, Richard. 15 years together, and this is how you mark our anniversary. Elena, dear, Vivian intervened with practiced concern. Perhaps we could discuss this another time? The chef has prepared Richard's favorite for dinner. Mr. Caldwell, I turned to the lawyer, ignoring Vivian completely. Was this document your recommendation? The balding man tugged at his collar. I merely drafted what was requested, Mrs. Lancaster. I don't typically advise on family matters. Well, this family matter just lost her appetite. I reached for my purse and the small wrapped gift I'd brought for Richard. I placed it on the coffee table without a word. Where are you going? Richard demanded, finally standing. We haven't even cut the anniversary cake. I've lost my taste for sweets, I said, walking to the coat closet. I pulled out the cashmere wrap Richard had bought me last Christmas. The fabric felt suffocating against my skin, or maybe that was just the lump forming in my throat. You know what's funny? I paused at the doorway, looking back at the tableau of wealth and betrayal. You all think you're punishing me, but really, I smiled, thinking about the secret I'd been keeping. You might be punishing yourselves more than you realize. What's that supposed to mean? Vivian stood, her perfectly Botoxed forehead attempting to furrow. Happy anniversary, I said, ignoring her question. And good luck. Something tells me you're going to need it. The heavy mahogany door closed behind me with a satisfying thud. Outside, city lights sparkled across the skyline as a light rain began to fall, matching the tears I finally allowed to spill. I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Catherine? Yes, it's done. They did exactly what we expected. I walked to the elevator, heels clicking against marble. No, I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. Remember that contingency plan we discussed? I think it's time. As I descended from the penthouse, I couldn't help but smile through my tears. They thought they were writing me out of their story, but they had no idea I was about to become the author of their downfall. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. You're being childish. Come back upstairs. You're embarrassing yourself. I typed back quickly. On the contrary, darling. This is the most adult decision I've made since saying I do. Goodbye. Stepping into the lobby, I nodded at the doorman who knew better than to mention my smeared mascara. The family might have their precious will, but I had something better. A plan. And thanks to Richard's own oversight, I had the means to execute it perfectly. The beach house in the Hamptons he'd carelessly put in my name for tax purposes 3 years ago would fund my dreams and their nightmare. They just didn't know it yet. Some legacies aren't inherited, I whispered to myself, watching the rain wash away the reflection of the Lancaster building behind me. They're built from nothing, one careful step at a time. The rain kept falling, soaking through my expensive wrap, washing away 15 years of compromise and silence. By this time next year, everything would be different. And I couldn't wait to serve Richard and his family their just desserts. For months earlier, I stood in the empty beach house, key in hand, while Catherine whistled low beside me. And they seriously forgot this was in your name? A whole-ass beach house in the Hamptons. She ran her hand along the pristine white wainscoting, admiring the ocean view through floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard put it in my name 3 years ago to shield it from some corporate liability issue, I explained, unlocking the terrace doors to let in the salty breeze. They haven't used it since last summer. Probably doesn't even remember the tax implications. The interior was exactly as it had been during our last weekend here, all nautical blues and crisp whites, frozen in time like a perfectly preserved museum of a marriage that had been dying for years. How much do you think it's worth? Catherine asked, peeking into the gourmet kitchen with its marble countertops and top-of-the-line appliances. I pulled out my phone, showing her the realtor's confidential estimate. Her eyes widened. Holy shit, Elena. That's enough, too. Fund my design firm, and then some? I finished, running my fingers along the dusty kitchen island. The down payment on commercial space, renovation costs, marketing, everything. And the best part? It's completely legal. The property transfer was legitimate. He signed it over to me, fair and square. Catherine flopped onto the linen-covered sofa, sending up a cloud of dust. Okay, walk me through this master plan of yours again. Simple, I said, unlocking a cabinet to reveal Richard's premium Scotch collection. I sell the house, use the money to launch Elena Designs, establish myself in the industry, and wait. Wait for what? She accepted the crystal tumbler I handed her. For karma to do its thing, I sat beside her, taking a satisfying sip of Richard's 12-year single malt. What my husband doesn't know is that Lancaster Holdings is in trouble. Big trouble. How do you know that? Remember my friend Marcus from college? He works in commercial real estate now. Let's just say their latest attempt to acquire that downtown development hit some major financing roadblocks. Richard's been hiding it from his parents, taking increasingly desperate measures. The next few weeks were a blur of real estate agents, paperwork, and secret meetings. The house sold faster than expected. Turns out oceanfront property in the Hamptons is quite desirable, even at a slight discount for a quick, quiet sale. You're really doing this, Marcus said over lunch one day, reviewing my business plan. I've got to admit, when you first mentioned it, I thought you were just venting after another one of Richard's gala humiliations. People always underestimate me, I replied, sliding him preliminary sketches for my design studio. Including my husband. What do you think? He examined the renderings, nodding appreciatively. The location is perfect, visible, accessible, but not ostentatious. The concept is sophisticated but approachable. Very you. That's the point, I said. Everything Richard thinks is frivolous about me, my eye for colors, my interest in sustainable materials, my obsession with functional spaces, they're all strengths in this industry. But are you sure you want to burn this bridge with the Lancasters? They're powerful enemies to make. They burned it first. I closed my portfolio firmly. Besides, this isn't about revenge. It's about finally doing something for myself. But even as I said it, I couldn't ignore the satisfaction I felt knowing what was coming. The day I signed the lease on my commercial space, Catherine brought champagne. We sat on the dusty floor of the empty storefront, drinking from paper cups. To Elena Designs, she toasted, may your success be as beautiful as your vision. It's not revenge, I protested weakly. Honey, You're literally using Richard's forgotten beach house to fund your independence while he's about to face financial ruin. That's some premium revenge right there. I couldn't argue with that. The contractors started work the next day, transforming the space into my vision. Every decision felt like a step further from Richard's shadow. The warm lighting fixtures, the sustainable bamboo flooring, the custom-designed table where clients would see their dreams take shape. The morning we installed the sign, I stood across the street watching the elegant script catch the sunlight. Elena Designs, spaces that tell your story. My name, my rules. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. Missed you at the Andersons' charity gala. Mother asked where you were. Call me. I typed back. Been busy. Big things happening. Whatever your little project is, don't embarrass the family name. The Whitney's anniversary party is Saturday. Be ready by 7. I smiled, pocketing my phone as the first delivery of fabric samples and material catalogs arrived. Let him think I was playing at business. Let him dismiss me one last time. Where do you want the design tables? The delivery woman called out. Against that wall? I pointed, where everyone walking by can see them through the windows. Because that was part of the plan too, letting success speak for itself in a space deliberately chosen just 3 blocks from Lancaster Holdings headquarters. The sweet scent of karma was already in the air, and soon, it would be impossible to ignore. We got another client waiting in the lounge, and the Westover project consultation just confirmed for this afternoon. Jade, my new assistant, called from the front desk. I looked up from the mood board I was finalizing and smiled. For months in, and Elena Designs had become one of the most sought-after interior design studios in the city. The morning sun streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a reception area filled with potential clients thumbing through our portfolio books. The feature in Architectural Digest just went live, Catherine announced, walking in with coffee for both of us. She'd left her corporate job to become my business partner, handling the financial side while I focused on design. They're calling you the innovative voice modern spaces have been waiting for. I took the coffee, savoring both the rich flavor and the moment. Here, I handed her a fresh rendering of the Donovan penthouse concept, payment for being my unofficial PR manager. Speaking of PR, she lowered her voice, glancing around. Word at the Chamber of Commerce mixer is that Lancaster Holdings isn't doing so well. They've had to quietly lay off their entire development team. I concentrated on adjusting the lighting scheme for the Westover project. Is that so? You know, most people would feel bad about their spouse's company struggling. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Most people's spouses wouldn't cut them out of their will on their anniversary. I set down my stylus. Besides, I warned him. Sort of. The bell above our door chimed, and I heard Vivian Lancaster's unmistakable voice asking for me. Catherine's eyes widened. Holy shit, it's the monster-in-law. Want me to say you're not here? No. I smoothed my dress. I think it's time for a family reunion. I stepped into the reception area where Vivian stood, her critical gaze taking in every detail of my studio. Her expression shifted from disdain to reluctant appreciation as she noted the line of waiting clients and the awards already displayed on our walls. Elena, she said stiffly, this is unexpected. Vivian. I gestured to one of our consultation rooms. What a surprise. What can I help you with? We're showcasing new sustainable material options this week. Or perhaps you're interested in our commercial redesign services? I couldn't resist the slight dig. She flinched at my casual tone. Richard and I need to discuss something with you. Something important. I'm pretty busy here. I gestured to the full reception area. You know how it is running a successful business. But my assistant can schedule you in next week. Please, she said, and for the first time in 15 years of knowing her, I heard a crack in Vivian Lancaster's perfect facade. It's about the company. We need your help. I let the words hang in the air, savoring them like the perfect sip of aged wine. Behind her, Catherine was practically vibrating with anticipation. Well, I said finally, I do have a cancellation this afternoon at 4. I could meet you then. I paused, then added with a sweet smile, at my office, of course. Vivian's eyes darted around my thriving design studio, my studio, and she nodded stiffly. As she left, Catherine sidled up to me. "You're going to make them grovel, right?" I watched my mother-in-law's retreating form through the window, remembering our anniversary eve, remembering years of condescension at family functions, remembering how they all laughed at my little hobby. "No," I said, turning back to my waiting clients. "I'm going to make them see exactly what they've lost." At exactly 4 o'clock, Richard and Vivian walked into Elena Designs. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across our reclaimed wood floors, and I'd closed the studio to other clients, sending my staff home early. Only Catherine remained, pretending to review fabric swatches while shamelessly eavesdropping. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, gesturing to the artisanal tea set I'd arranged. "It's white jasmine, your favorite, Richard." "This isn't a social call," Vivian snapped, but Richard put a hand on her arm. "Tea would be lovely," he said, settling into one of my custom-designed chairs. His eyes kept darting around the studio, taking in the wall of design awards, the press clippings, the mood boards for mansions larger than his own. I poured 3 cups, adding a plate of French macarons from the boutique bakery next door. "So, what brings the Lancasters to my little hobby?" I couldn't resist using his own dismissive words. Richard's jaw tightened. "We need to discuss a business proposition." "Business?" I raised an eyebrow. I thought interior design was just playing with fabric swatches and throw pillows. "Isn't that what you told the Whitmeys at their anniversary party?" "Things have changed," Vivian said carefully. "The company is facing some temporary difficulties." "Temporary?" I took a delicate sip of tea. "That's not what I heard. I heard you've laid off staff, lost the West Side development deal, and your stock has dropped 30% in 3 months." "How did you?" Richard started. Then his eyes narrowed. "Marcus Jenkins. That snake." "Marcus is a friend. Unlike family, friends actually look out for each other." Vivian set down her cup with a clatter. "We're here because we need a partner. Someone with liquid assets and creative vision for our residential development division." I couldn't help but laugh. "Creative vision? For months ago you both said I was throwing my education away on frivolous pursuits." "We were wrong," Richard said quietly, and for a moment, I almost believed him. "What you've built here, it's impressive. Very impressive. The Architectural Digest feature, the Sullivan Mansion renovation, your new commercial clients." Vivian added, though it clearly pained her to compliment me. I interrupted. "So this is about the Hartwick development deal." Richard paled slightly. "Among other things." He pulled out a folder. "We're prepared to offer you a partnership in Lancaster Holdings. Full voting rights, equal share with me in the residential division." I took the folder but didn't open it. "And what makes you think I'd want that?" "Because it's your legacy too," Richard insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. I smoothly moved my hand away. "You're still a Lancaster." "My legacy?" I stood up, walking to the wall of press clippings. "This is my legacy. Elena Designs, which you said would fail within 6 months. That's my legacy." "The company is struggling," Richard admitted, his voice rough. "Without an injection of capital and a fresh design perspective for the residential properties, we could lose everything." "Funny how karma works, isn't it?" I mused. From her spot by the material library, Catherine didn't even pretend not to be listening anymore. "What do you want?" Vivian asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Name your price." I turned back to them, leaning against my design table. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about money." I gestured around my studio. "This is about respect. Recognition. Everything you never gave me. We're giving it now." Richard's fist hit the table, rattling the teacups. "No, you're not," I said calmly. "You're here because you're desperate. Because your investors are pulling out and your new development concept looks like every other soulless luxury property in the city." Vivian's face paled. "The beach house. That's how you funded all this." "The beach house you forgot was in my name?" "Yes." I smiled. "Turns out I'm pretty good at managing assets when people underestimate me." "You planned this," Richard accused. "All of it." "No, you planned this," I corrected him. Every time you dismissed my ideas at dinner parties. Every time you told me to leave the business to the men. Every time you tried to turn me into just another corporate wife. I opened the folder, scanned the partnership offer, then slowly tore it in half. I just adapted. You're enjoying this, Vivian whispered, watching me with new eyes. Seeing us suffer. Actually, I'm not. I gathered the torn papers. I'm just finally standing up for myself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have designs to finish for clients who actually value my work. They stood, Richard's face red with anger, Vivian's with shame. At the door, he turned back. What about us? He asked. 15 years of marriage. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant everything to me until our anniversary eve, when you showed me exactly how little it meant to you. After they left, Catherine let out a long, low whistle. That was intense. It's not over, I said, starting to clear the tea service. They'll be back. And nothing. Lancaster Holdings can sink or swim on its own. I'm done playing their games. My phone buzzed, a text from Richard. You're being unreasonable. We were offering you a genuine partnership. I typed back. No, you were trying to save yourselves. Big difference. By the way, how's that corner office working out now that you've had to sublease half your floor? Catherine read the exchange over my shoulder. You know what this calls for? What? I asked. She grinned, pulling out 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne from my office mini fridge. Victory bubbles. We spent the next hour toasting to Elena Design's success and planning my next high-profile project. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about succeeding so spectacularly they have to watch from the sidelines. They're selling the penthouse, Marcus announced, bursting into my office early Monday morning. The Lancasters' primary residence. It's happening. I looked up from the material samples I'd been reviewing for the governor's vacation home. Already? I thought they'd last at least another month. 3 major investors pulled out last week. Word got around about their cash flow problems. He made a diving motion with his hand. It's like watching dominoes fall. My phone lit up with a call from Richard. I put it on speaker. This is your fault, he said before I could speak. You did this to us. Actually, Richard, you did this to yourselves. I just refused to save you. Vivian's devastated. Edward hasn't left his study in days. Is this what you wanted? I signed the approval for the governor's beach house design, pushing it aside. What I wanted was a husband who valued me. What I got was cut out of the will on our anniversary eve. Funny how life works out. We're having dinner at my parents' tonight, he said, his voice suddenly controlled. You need to come. Need to? I don't need to do anything. Please, he whispered, and for the first time in our marriage, I heard genuine emotion in his voice. Everything's falling apart. I glanced at Marcus, who shrugged. Fine. What time? 7. And Elena, leave your attitude at that design studio of yours. I hung up, turning to Marcus. Want to be my backup? He shook his head. This is between you and the Lancasters. But text me if you need an escape plan. At 7 sharp, I pulled up to the Lancaster mansion, the place I'd called home for over a decade. It looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating, like seeing a childhood ghost in daylight and realizing it's just a shadow. Richard opened the door before I could knock. They're in the dining room. Try not to make things worse. Lovely to see you too, darling, I replied coolly. The formal dining room was a museum of uncomfortable memories, stilted family dinners, lectures about appropriate behavior for a Lancaster, countless disappointments. Edward and Vivian sat at opposite ends of the massive table, a feast laid out between them that no one was touching. You came, Vivian said softly. I'm curious by nature. I took my old seat, noting that Richard sat beside me rather than across from me. So, what's this about? Edward cleared his throat. We've made mistakes. Serious mistakes. The company, Vivian started. I know about the company, I interrupted. Marcus keeps me informed. Of course he does, Richard muttered. We've lost almost everything, Edward continued. The house will have to be sold. The vacation properties, too. Property, I corrected. Singular. I already sold the beach house, remember? Vivian flinched. We deserve that. But Elena, we're still family. Are we? Because the last time we had dinner together, you handed me disinheritance papers as an anniversary gift. We were wrong, Edward said, and the admission hung heavy in the air. About everything. The company, your design talent, you. Elena Designs is worth more than Lancaster Holdings now, Richard added bitterly. Happy. I pushed my untouched plate away. What do you want from me? A chance, Vivian said. To make things right. To be a family again. And the fact that I'm successful now has nothing to do with it? We're not asking for money, Edward insisted. No. I raised an eyebrow. Then what are you asking for? Forgiveness, Vivian whispered. A fresh start. I stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the garden where we'd held our wedding reception was overgrown, another casualty of their financial collapse. You know what's ironic? I turned back to them. If you'd supported my vision from the beginning, I probably would have helped you now. But you made me prove myself by fighting you every step of the way. We know, Richard said, and I saw genuine regret in his eyes. And we're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix years of condescension, I said. Sorry doesn't erase our anniversary eve. Sorry doesn't. Then tell us what will. Richard burst out. Tell us how to fix this. I looked at each of them. Vivian's perfectly maintained facade crumbling, Edward's proud shoulders slumped, Richard's hands shaking slightly as he reached for his water glass. Time, I said finally. Time and proof that you've actually changed. Not because you need something from me, but because you actually understand what you did wrong. And until then? Vivian asked. I reached into my bag, pulling out a small portfolio. Until then, you can have this. It's a redesign concept for downsizing from a mansion to a luxury condo. I call it Elegant Transitions. The Lancaster name still carries enough weight to get you a good deal on the Riverside development. Is this a joke? Richard asked. No, I replied, heading for the door. It's a reminder. Sometimes you have to lose everything to appreciate what matters. Elena, Edward called after me. Will we see you again? I paused in the doorway. The studio's open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 6. You know where to find me. Walking out, I felt lighter somehow, not because I'd forgiven them. That would take time, but because finally, after all these years, I was the one walking away on my terms. The morning after the Lancaster family dinner, I arrived at Elena Designs to find Richard waiting outside, still wearing yesterday's rumpled suit. Have you been here all night? I asked, unlocking the door. No, just since dawn. He followed me in, dark circles under his eyes. I've been thinking about what you said about proof. I started my morning routine, turning on lights and checking the day's appointments. And I want a job, he said, straightening his shoulders. The measuring cup I was using to water the office plants clattered to the counter. Excuse me? I want to work here. For you. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I need to understand. Understand what? Everything. How you built this. How you knew it would work. How you're so confident now. I studied his face for any sign of manipulation. You've never worked anywhere but Lancaster Holdings your entire life. I know, he swallowed hard. I'll start at the bottom. Answering phones. Making coffee. Whatever you need. Why should I trust you? Because I have nothing left to lose, his voice cracked. The company's gone. My savings are nearly gone. My parents are selling their home of 40 years. I watched him for a long moment. Fine. You can start by organizing the material library. Then we'll talk. For the next several hours, I watched my perfectly manicured Harvard MBA husband catalog fabric swatches, organize with samples, and learn to use the industrial printer. He didn't complain once. Your hands are blistered. I noticed during the lunch rush when clients were flowing in and out of consultations. He looked down at his reddened palms. Paper cuts from the catalog cards. It's fine. Here. I handed him some hand cream. First lesson of building something from nothing. Take care of yourself or you can't take care of business. The bell above the door chimed, and Vivian walked in. She froze at the sight of Richard in shirt sleeves, carrying a stack of design books to a client. "What are you doing?" she asked, horrified. "Working, mother," Richard replied. Mrs. Donovan needed these references for her consultation with Elena. "But you're a Lancaster," she hissed. "Lancasters don't serve." "Was a Lancaster executive," he corrected her. "Now I'm learning how to earn an honest living." Vivian turned to me. "Is this some kind of punishment?" "No," I said, arranging material samples for my next client. "This is his choice. First real one he's made in years, probably." "I came to tell you," Vivian hesitated. "We sold the mansion. We're moving to a condo next week." "Good," I replied evenly. "Maybe you'll learn something too." "Your father-in-law is looking for work," she added, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Really? Doing what?" "Anything," she admitted, eyes downcast. "But no one's hiring. His reputation is exactly what he earned," I finished. Clients began arriving for afternoon appointments, and I handed Richard a list of tasks. "We'll talk later." The afternoon passed in a blur of consultations. To my surprise, Richard handled each task efficiently, even anticipating needs before I expressed them. "You're good at this," I admitted reluctantly as we closed the studio that evening. "I've been watching you," he said simply. "How you listen to clients. How you translate their jumbled thoughts into cohesive concepts. It's a genuine talent, Elena." "I'm sorry I never saw that before." "Why now?" I asked, locking the supply cabinet. "Why are you suddenly seeing clearly?" He looked around the thriving studio I'd built. "Because I have nothing left to distract me. No family legacy to hide behind. No wealth to cushion my ego." He met my eyes directly. "I was blind, Elena. To you, to what we could have been together." "We're closed for the weekend," I said, changing the subject. "Take Monday off. Your hands need to heal." "Can I come back Tuesday?" There was vulnerability in his voice I'd never heard before. "That depends on you," I replied, gathering my things. "On whether this is just a desperate play for help, or if you're actually trying to change." As I left, Catherine called. "How was the family dinner last night? Did they grovel magnificently?" "It was unexpected," I said, watching Richard walk slowly toward the bus stop, a man who'd never taken public transportation in his life. "They're actually trying to change." "Trying or pretending?" she asked skeptically. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I'm going to find out." 2 weeks later, Richard had become an unexpectedly valuable assistant. His business acumen, once directed at corporate acquisitions, now helped streamline our operations. His network, though diminished, still opened doors to exclusive properties and high-end clients. The Morgenstern account just signed, he announced one morning, pride evident in his voice. "That's 3 major projects this month." "Your idea to showcase the sustainability angle worked," I acknowledged. "They specifically mentioned it in the contract." "I learned from the best," he said with a small smile. "You always saw value where others saw expense." The studio door opened, and Edward Lancaster walked in, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. Is there an application I should fill out?" he asked, holding his worn leather briefcase like a shield. Richard stared at his father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Your mother found work at Hartwell's department store," Edward explained. "I thought perhaps if Elena needs someone with financial experience." I studied my father-in-law, the man who once told me my place was looking pretty at Richard's side, not playing with paint chips. Now he stood before me, humbled, asking for work. "Experience is valuable," I said carefully. "But so is respect for creative vision. Can you take direction from a woman you once dismissed?" "I'm learning many lessons lately," Edward replied, his voice rough, "including that I was terribly wrong about many things." I glanced at Richard, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We need someone to review contracts and manage client billing. It's part-time, hourly pay, no benefits." Relief washed over Edward's face. "When can I start?" "Now." I handed him a stack of invoices. "First task, reconcile these with our project completion reports. Richard will show you the system." As they walked to the back office, Catherine appeared at my side. "Are you collecting Lancasters now?" Should I expect Vivian next week? They're learning, I said, watching Edward take instruction from his son. And so am I. Learning what? I turned back to my designs. That sometimes the best revenge isn't watching people fall. It's watching them climb back up on their own terms. Our anniversary date approached again, marking 1 year since Richard had tried to cut me out of his life. The irony wasn't lost on me that now he worked for my company, lived in a modest apartment, and had slowly begun to earn my professional respect, if not my forgiveness. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said one evening as we closed the studio. "For our anniversary." "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, gathering my portfolio. "Not as a romantic gesture," he clarified quickly. "As acknowledgement of everything that's happened, everything that's changed." I studied him, the man who had once been the center of my world, now humbled but somehow more authentic than he'd ever been in an Italian suit. "One dinner," I agreed. "As colleagues." We met at a small bistro, nothing like the Michelin-starred restaurants he once insisted on. He arrived early, waiting with a single rose rather than the ostentatious bouquets of the past. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "It seemed appropriate," I replied. "Full circle. I have something for you." He slid a large envelope across the table. Inside was a legal document, divorce papers already signed by him, with all assets clearly listed as mine alone. "I don't understand," I said, looking up. "It's freedom," he explained, "if that's what you want. No contests, no claims. You've built an extraordinary life, Elena. You deserve to choose what happens next, without obligation to the past." I stared at the papers, then at the man who had been my husband for 16 years. "Why now?" "Because a year ago, I tried to cut you out to protect what I thought was important. I've spent every day since then realizing how wrong I was." He smiled sadly. "Consider this my anniversary gift. Your choice, with no strings attached." I folded the papers and put them back in the envelope. "I'll think about it." As we ate dinner, conversation flowed more honestly than it had in years. He asked about my new design concepts. I asked about his parents' adjustment to their downsized life. "Mother's actually enjoying her job," he admitted with surprise. "She said helping people find the right outfit gives her purpose." "And your father?" "Learning to take direction from a woman half his age." Richard smiled. "It's good for him." As the evening ended, he walked me to my car. "Whatever you decide about the papers, thank you for this year. For the hardest, most important lessons of my life." "You taught me something too," I replied. "What's that?" "That sometimes people can change, if they're brave enough to start from nothing." We stood in the gentle evening light, two people who had traveled from love to betrayal to something unexpected, mutual respect built from the ashes of what we'd burned down. "Happy anniversary, Elena," he said softly. "Happy anniversary, Richard," I answered, and for the first time in a year, there was no bitterness in my voice. 6 months after our anniversary dinner, Elena Designs had expanded to 3 locations across the city. I stood in front of our newest acquisition, a sleek storefront in the same building that once housed Lancaster Holdings' most prestigious offices. "Not bad for someone who is just playing with fabric swatches," Marcus said, standing beside me. Speaking of which, Richard emerged from my car carrying material samples for our newest client, the mayor's office renovation. He traded his custom suits for well-fitting business casual attire, and his hands now showed the calluses of someone who worked with physical materials daily. "The contractors are waiting for the final approval on the conference room concept," he said, handing me the samples with an efficiency that had become our comfortable rhythm. "How's Vivian doing with her new role?" Marcus asked him. "You'd hardly recognize her," Richard shrugged with a hint of pride. "She's been promoted to floor manager at Hartwell's. Apparently, her talent for organizing charity galas translates well to managing seasonal displays." "And you?" I turned to Richard. "Ready for your own promotion?" He nearly dropped the design portfolio he was carrying. "What?" "I need someone to manage the new commercial division we're launching. Someone who understands both corporate expectations and our design philosophy." Richard stared at me. "But I've only been here 10 months of showing up early, staying late, learning every aspect of the business and never once complaining about taking direction from your ex-wife. I pulled out a contract. What do you say? Emotion washed over his face.
Why?
After everything? Because you earned it. The hard way. The right way. The head contractor called out from the building entrance, interrupting our moment. Ms. Elena, we need you to approve the final layout for the executive showroom. Coming, I called back. Think about it, Richard. Let me know by the end of the week. Inside, the space was transforming. Workers installing our signature lighting, craftspeople assembling custom display areas. My growing empire wasn't just about design anymore. It had become about creating opportunities. Your father-in-law is here, my assistant announced. He's in the reception area. I found Edward waiting by the front desk, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, despite the modest off-the-rack suit that had replaced his bespoke wardrobe. The quarterly financial reports are complete, he said, handing me a folder. We've exceeded projections by 17%. Thank you, Edward. How's the new bookkeeping system working out? Efficiently. Much better than the outdated methods we used at Lancaster Holdings. He hesitated. I've been offered a CFO position at Westbrook Investments. I raised an eyebrow. Congratulations. When do you start? I turned it down, he said, meeting my eyes. Why would you do that? Because I haven't finished learning here yet. He straightened his shoulders. You've built something extraordinary, Elena. Something based on genuine value, not just family connections and old money. I'd like to stay if you'll have me. I studied the man who had once dismissed me at every family gathering. The commercial division will need a financial controller. It's yours if you want it. Relief and something like pride crossed his face. I won't disappoint you. I know, I replied. You can't afford to anymore. Catherine burst in, excitement on her face. The Architectural Heritage Foundation approved our bid for the Wilson Theater restoration. It's the biggest commercial project in the city. Perfect timing, I smiled. We're just staffing up the commercial team. Edward nodded toward the windows where Richard could be seen directing delivery workers. You've made quite an impact on the Lancaster men. They've made their own choices, I said, watching Richard efficiently organize material deliveries. I just provided the opportunity. As the day progressed, I received a text from Vivian. Dinner at our condo on Sunday? I've been taking cooking classes. I smiled at the thought of Vivian Lancaster, who once employed 3 personal chefs, now proudly learning to cook. I'll bring dessert, I texted back. Later that afternoon, I found Richard in the design library, carefully organizing our new collection of sustainable materials. I've been thinking about your offer, he said, looking up from his work. And I'm grateful, but I'd like to propose an alternative. He handed me a business plan, a subsidiary focused on sustainable commercial design. Smaller scale than what you're planning, but with potential for significant impact. I scanned the document, impressed by the thoroughness and innovation. You've put a lot of thought into this. I've had an excellent teacher, he replied with a small smile. Someone who showed me how to build something meaningful from scratch. It would mean building your own team, I said. Starting small again. I know. That's what I want, to earn it completely, not just to be given a position because of our history. I closed the folder. Submit this formally to the board next week. If they approve, and I think they will, you'll have your sustainable design division.
Thank you, he said simply.
As he turned to leave, I called after him. Richard? Yes. Those divorce papers you gave me 6 months ago. His expression remained carefully neutral. Have you decided? I have. I pulled them from my desk drawer and signed. I think we both still have more to learn about who we are now, don't you? A flash of hope crossed his face. Does that mean? It means I'm not closing doors yet, I clarified. We're different people than we were a year ago. I'm curious to see who we become next. That evening, I toured the nearly completed showroom alone, running my fingers along the surfaces we'd chosen, adjusting lighting to highlight textures perfectly. My phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. Financial Times wants to interview you for their Women Redefining Business feature. You've come a long way from being cut out of the will, girl. I smiled, remembering the tearful woman who had left her anniversary dinner a year ago, feeling betrayed and discarded. If someone had told me then that the Lancaster family would now work for my company, that Richard would find purpose in starting over, that I would build something that surpassed anything the Lancasters had created, I wouldn't have believed it. My phone rang, the contractor with a question about tomorrow's installation schedule. As I answered, I caught my reflection in the gleaming windows, backdropped by the city lights. I barely recognized the confident businesswoman staring back at me. Sometimes the most unexpected gifts, I whispered to myself between calls, come from the most painful betrayals. Sunday dinner at Vivian and Edward's modest condo was nothing like the formal affairs of Lancaster Mansion past. Their dining table barely seated 6. The china was from a department store, and Vivian proudly served a slightly overcooked roast she'd prepared herself. "It's not quite right," she fretted, watching us take our first bites. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Because you made it yourself." Edward raised his glass, ordinary wine in practical stemware, to Elena Design's Wilson Theater project, the biggest restoration in the city's history. "And to new beginnings," Richard added, his eyes meeting mine across the table. As the conversation flowed around saving historic buildings and sustainable materials, I marveled at how much had changed. These people who had once valued only wealth and status were now finding pride in honest work and genuine accomplishment. "I have something for you," Vivian said after dinner, handing me a small package. Inside was a framed photo of me at 5 years old, covered in paint, proudly showing off a mural I'd created on my bedroom wall. "You kept this?" I asked, surprised. "Your mother gave it to me when you and Richard got engaged," she explained. "She said you'd always had an eye for transforming spaces." I didn't understand then. I do now. I studied the photograph of the determined little girl who would one day build an empire from her creativity. "Thank you. This means a lot." As the evening wound down, Richard walked me to my car. "That was nice. Almost normal." "Almost," I agreed. "Your mother's really trying." "We all are," he said softly. "Some transformations take longer than others." "Like the Wilson Theater renovation," I mused. "Preserving what matters while creating something new." He laughed. "Always the designer, seeing metaphors in architecture." "It's how I make sense of the world," I admitted. We stood in comfortable silence, two people who had traveled from love to betrayal to something new, not quite forgiveness, not quite reconciliation, but authentic respect. "Good night, Elena," he said finally. "Good night, Richard," I replied, but instead of immediately getting in my car, I added, "Your sustainable design presentation to the board tomorrow, it's really good. You've learned a lot." "From the best," he said with a genuine smile. As I drove away, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't in watching the Lancasters fall. It was in being the one who could offer them the chance to rise again, on different terms. Not as entitled aristocrats, but as people who had to earn their place like everyone else. The anniversary that had begun with betrayal had set me on a path I never expected, one where I built something more valuable than inheritance or status. I'd built authenticity for myself and, unexpectedly, for the family that had once rejected me. My phone rang. It was the Wilson Theater project manager with urgent questions about tomorrow's presentation. As I answered, giving clear directions with newfound authority, I smiled at how far I'd come from the woman who once sought approval from the Lancaster family. Now I was writing my own legacy, one design at a time. The local business awards ceremony buzzed with anticipation as I adjusted my name tag. Elena Lancaster, CEO, Elena Designs. Beside me, Richard fidgeted with his own. Richard Lancaster, Director, Sustainable Commercial Division. "Stop fussing," I whispered. "You've earned your place here." "Did you know your in-laws would be here?" Catherine asked, nodding toward the back of the room where Edward and Vivian sat, dressed in their new, more modest but dignified attire. "They bought tickets like everyone else," I replied, smoothing my designer dress, one of my own creations, a collaboration with a local fashion designer who'd approached me after seeing our work in Architectural Digest. "That's progress." Marcus appeared, grinning. "They're about to announce Business of the Year." Ready for your speech?
Speech.
Richard looked confused. You think it's a coincidence we're sitting at the front table? I winked. The mayor stepped to the podium, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's recipient has transformed our downtown, created hundreds of jobs, and shown us that success comes from vision, determination, and resilience. A hush fell over the crowd. Elena Design started as a small studio defying conventional business wisdom. Today, it encompasses 5 locations, renowned commercial division, multiple property holdings, and a commitment to sustainable development that has revitalized our city's historic districts. I stood as my name was called, the applause washing over me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Vivian dabbing at tears, Edward sitting straight-backed with pride, and Richard, his expression a complex mix of admiration and something deeper. Thank you, I began, reaching into my clutch for my notes. Instead, my fingers found the torn anniversary card from that fateful night. I'd carried it with me every day since, a reminder of where I'd started. I said it on the podium. Success isn't inherited, I said, looking directly at the Lancasters. It's built from nothing, with equal parts determination and vision. The room fell silent. Sometimes the people who should believe in you don't, and that's okay. I continued. It just means you have to believe in yourself twice as hard. Catherine hooped from her table, making everyone laugh. But success without growth, personal growth, is just numbers on a spreadsheet. Real success is watching people change, including yourself. I smiled at Richard. It's seeing family members trade entitlement for purpose. It's watching people learn humility through honest work. It's building something bigger than revenge. Vivian's hand found Edward's, squeezing tight. Elena Design started as my dream of independence. Now it's a dream of second chances, for our city's historic buildings, for our employees, for relationships, even for those who once tried to write you out of their story. I picked up the torn anniversary card. This was given to me 2 years ago, along with the news that I'd been cut out of my husband's will. I kept it to remind myself of rejection. Now I keep it to remind myself of transformation, not just mine, but everyone's capacity to change when they're willing to do the work. The applause was deafening as I left the stage. Richard hugged me, whispering, "That wasn't just about business, was it?" "Nothing ever is," I replied. After the ceremony, Edward and Vivian approached our table. Edward spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "Your speech. We don't deserve such grace." "It's not about deserving," I interrupted. "It's about growing. You both did the work. You're still doing it." "We're so proud," Vivian said, her voice sincere in a way I'd never heard before. "Not of what you built, though that's remarkable, but of who you've become." "Even without the Lancaster legacy?" I couldn't resist asking. "You built your own legacy," Edward replied. "A better one." "Speaking of building," Richard chimed in, "should we tell them about the foundation project?" I nodded. "We're converting one of our downtown properties into a design incubator for underprivileged youth, teaching them how creative vision can transform their futures. Like starting over with nothing but talent and determination," Edward said, a small smile playing at his lips. "Exactly like that." I turned to Vivian. "We need experienced retail managers to teach some of the classes." "Interested." Her eyes widened. "You want me to teach others?" "What you've learned about humility, hard work, starting over, it's valuable. More valuable than the social connections you once traded in." "I'd be honored," she whispered. Marcus appeared with champagne, passing glasses around. "To Elena Design's next chapter?" "No," I said, raising my glass. "To new beginnings, earned, not inherited." As we clinked glasses, I caught Catherine's knowing smile from across the room. She'd been there from the start, watching my revenge plot transform into something more meaningful than mere success. "You know," Richard said softly, "that anniversary eve was the best thing that ever happened to this family." "How so?" "It broke us down to nothing. Made us rebuild. Made us real." I looked around at my empire. Not just the business I'd built, but the people, Richard finding purpose and honest work, his parents learning humility and pride in equal measure, my friends who had believed in me when no one else did. Real is good, I agreed, pulling out my phone to show them the designs for the youth center. Now, who's ready to help others get real too? 2 months later, I stood in the newly renovated Wilson Theater at our official unveiling gala. The historic building gleamed with restored gilding and modernized systems, a perfect blend of heritage and innovation that had become Elena Design's signature. The mayor just arrived with the governor, Catherine reported, checking her clipboard. And the waiting list for the Youth Foundation is already at capacity for the first year. Double the enrollment, I decided. We'll find the funding. Already taken care of. Richard appeared at my side in a well-fitted tuxedo, not the ostentatious luxury of his Lancaster Holdings days, but something with quiet elegance. The Sustainable Division secured 3 corporate sponsorships this morning. They want to be associated with the Foundation's mission. Impressive, I acknowledged. Your team is delivering results faster than projected. We have good leadership, he replied with a meaningful look. The gala was in full swing, city officials, business leaders, and arts patrons mingling beneath the theater's spectacular dome that my team had painstakingly restored. In one corner, Edward was deep in conversation with potential investors for our next restoration project. Nearby, Vivian was surprisingly engaged with a group of design students from the local community college where she now taught part-time. They're different people, Catherine marveled, following my gaze. We all are, I replied. As the evening progressed, the mayor called for attention to make the official dedication. When the speeches concluded, Richard found me by the champagne fountain. Dance with me? He asked, extending his hand. I hesitated only briefly before accepting. As we moved across the floor, I was acutely aware of how different this felt from our stilted anniversary celebrations of the past. Do you remember our last dance before everything? He asked. At the Whitney's charity gala, I recalled. You were annoyed that I was talking business with potential clients instead of charming the bank executives' wives.
He winced.
I was an arrogant fool. Yes, you were. I agreed without malice. But that man wouldn't have recognized the Richard Lancaster who now runs a sustainable design division and teaches at-risk youth about business ethics. I've been meaning to ask you something, he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. What's that? Those divorce papers, you never signed them, but you never tore them up either. I met his eyes. I was waiting. For what? To see if the changes were real.
In you.
In me. In what we might become. The music shifted to a slower tempo, and our steps adjusted naturally. And he asked softly, and I think it's time to close that chapter, one way or another. His face remained carefully neutral, but his hand tightened slightly on mine. I'll respect whatever you decide. I know you will, I said. That's part of why I've made my decision. Before I could continue, the mayor interrupted, needing both of us for a photo opportunity. The moment suspended between us like a held breath. Later that night, as the gala wound down, I found myself alone on the theater's rooftop terrace. The city lights spread before me. Somewhere out there was the penthouse where I'd once lived as a Lancaster wife, now sold to fund Richard's sustainable division. In another direction lay the beach house that had funded my independence. And directly below stood the Wilson Theater, a once-fading landmark now restored to glory through vision and persistence. There you are, Richard's voice came from behind me. Everyone's looking for you. The mayor wants to make one final toast. Just needed a moment, I explained, turning to face him, to take it all in. He joined me at the railing, respecting my space while sharing the view. It's quite a legacy you've built. We've built, I corrected him. All of us, together, once we started being honest about what matters. About what you said earlier, he began carefully. About closing chapters? I reached into my evening bag and pulled out the divorce papers, worn at the edges now from being carried around for months. I've made my decision. His expression remained admirably controlled as I handed him the documents. He opened them slowly, then looked up in surprise. Where there should have been signatures, I had written, "New contract proposed. Partners in life as in business. Equal terms. No fine print. Elena, his voice was barely audible. Are you sure? The man I married wouldn't have deserved this second chance, I said honestly. But you're not him anymore. And I'm not the woman you married either. Who are we then? Two people who lost everything and built something better from the ruins, I replied. Two people who learned the hard way what matters. Two people who might actually be ready for a real partnership. He looked down at my handwritten note again. Equal terms. Completely equal, I confirmed. In business and in life. No more Lancaster legacy overshadowing everything. Just us, building something together. And if I fail you again, then we'll both know we tried honestly this time. I took the papers back and tore them in half. No legal documents. Just a promise between equals. Below us, Catherine appeared at the terrace door. There you are. Everyone's waiting for the final toast. We're coming, I called back, then turned to Richard. Well, partners? He offered his hand formally, like sealing a business deal. Partners. As we shook hands, I couldn't help but laugh at the formality. That's how you respond to a proposal? His composure broke into a genuine smile. Not the practiced Lancaster charm of old, but something more authentic. I'm still learning the right protocols for equals. We both are, I acknowledged, taking his arm as we headed back to the gala. At the bottom of the stairs, before rejoining the crowd, I stopped him. Richard. Yes. Happy anniversary. He checked his watch, realization dawning. It is, isn't it? 2 years exactly, since that night. From the end to a new beginning, I said. As we rejoined the celebration, I caught sight of Edward and Vivian watching us with cautious hope. Catherine raised an eyebrow in silent question, and I gave her a small nod that made her break into a wide grin. The mayor raised his glass. To Elena Designs and the remarkable transformation of our city's crown jewel. As everyone cheered, Richard whispered, and to personal transformations too. Sometimes the most unexpected gift is the chance to rewrite your own story, not from revenge, but from wisdom hard-won. The greatest victory isn't in watching others fall, but in rising together towards something authentic and earned. And sometimes, just sometimes, the best revenge is finding happiness on your own terms and then being generous enough to share it. 1 year after the Wilson Theater Gala, I stood in the bright, open space of our newest venture, a historic warehouse transformed into the Elena Designs Academy. Students moved purposefully through the design studios, workshop spaces, and computer labs where once empty floors had housed forgotten inventory. The second-year class just unveiled their community center redesign, Richard announced, joining me at the observation window overlooking the main studio floor. The neighborhood association was speechless. 2 students already received internship offers. From competitors? I asked, smiling. Of course, he confirmed with a proud nod. But Martina and Deshawn both said they'd rather stay with us. Apparently having Elena Designs on their resume means more than a starting salary. It's not about the name, I corrected him. It's about what we stand for now. The space hummed with creative energy. Former Lancaster Holdings executives taught business ethics alongside design professionals, while students from every background learned that vision combined with discipline could transform more than just spaces. Your mother's sustainable materials class is oversubscribed again, I noted, checking the tablet in my hand. Who would have thought Vivian Lancaster would become our most popular instructor? She found her calling, Richard said, genuine warmth in his voice. Though Dad's accounting fundamentals course is giving her some competition. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Mayor's office on line 1. They want to discuss the Downtown Revitalization Committee appointment. Take it in my office, Richard suggested. I'll handle the donor tour. Actually, I said, handing him my tablet, you take the mayor's call. The downtown project was your proposal in the first place. A flash of surprise crossed his face before he nodded. Equal partners, right? In everything, I confirmed. As Richard headed toward the executive suite we now shared, I wandered through the academy, stopping to admire student projects and offer guidance. In the fabrication lab, Edward was helping a young woman troubleshoot a 3D printer. The trick is patience, he told her, his once commanding voice now gentle with genuine mentorship. Rushing good design never works. Neither does rushing life choices. Trust me on that. The student, a scholarship recipient from the same underprivileged neighborhood where we'd built our youth center, nodded attentively. Like you were saying about balance sheets, Mr. Lancaster. The numbers always tell the truth eventually. Exactly, Miranda. And please call me Edward. Mr. Lancaster was my father, and frankly, I'm trying to build something different. I smiled, moving on without interrupting their moment. 3 years ago, Edward Lancaster wouldn't have bothered learning a student's name, let alone offered personal wisdom. In the material library, now named for Vivian, I found my former mother-in-law surrounded by students debating the merits of various sustainable textiles. The aesthetic appeal matters, she was explaining, but not at the expense of ethical sourcing. Luxury isn't about exclusivity anymore. It's about responsibility. That's not what you used to say, I commented as the students dispersed to their assignments. Vivian smiled ruefully. I used to say a lot of foolish things, dressed up as wisdom. She gestured to the bustling academy around us. Watching young people build something meaningful, brings more satisfaction than all those charity galas ever did. Even without the designer gowns and society photographers? Especially without them, she said firmly. Though I do still appreciate good design. Some things never change, I laughed. I continued my tour, stopping by the commercial division offices where Marcus was demonstrating rendering software to potential clients, a mixed-income housing development that would have been beneath Lancaster Holdings' notice in the old days. Elena! Perfect timing, he called out. Can you tell these gentlemen about our community integration approach? For the next 30 minutes, I outlined our philosophy. That good design wasn't a luxury but a right, that spaces should serve people rather than status, that transformation could honor history while embracing the future. When the potential clients left, visibly impressed, Marcus gave me a knowing look. 3 years ago, would you have imagined this? You. Running not just a design empire, but essentially a Lancaster family reformation project. Never, I admitted. But then, revenge has a way of evolving when you're not looking. This stopped being about revenge a long time ago, he observed. Maybe it did, I agreed. Or maybe this is the best revenge, not destroying the Lancasters, but helping them become better versions of themselves. Later that afternoon, I found Richard in our shared office, finishing his call with the mayor. Good news, he announced as I entered. The revitalization project is approved. Full funding, with Elena Designs as the lead consultant. Congratulations, I said sincerely. This was your vision from the start. Our vision, he corrected. I may have proposed it, but it's built on the foundation you created. I perched on the edge of his desk, not the imposing mahogany fortress of Lancaster Holdings, but a collaborative workspace designed for conversation rather than intimidation. How are the anniversary plans coming? I asked, changing subjects. All set, he replied. Small dinner at home, just us. Unless you've changed your mind and want something more elaborate. No, that's perfect. We've had enough public celebrations lately. Our 3rd anniversary since that fateful night approached, but this time, we would mark it as true partners in a marriage rebuilt from scratch, not inherited from expectations. As evening fell, we locked up the academy together, nodding to the security guard as we left. Walking to the car, Richard took my hand, a simple gesture that now felt natural rather than obligatory. 3 years ago tonight, I made the worst mistake of my life, he reflected as we drove through downtown, passing buildings now bearing the Elena Designs touch. And started us both on a journey neither of us expected, I added. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Not my behavior. That was unforgivable, but the path it set you on? I considered the question seriously. How can I regret something that led to all this? Not just the business success, but the authentic relationships. The real purpose. Even with my parents? I laughed. Especially with your parents. Watching Vivian Lancaster teach underprivileged students about sustainable design while Edward mentors scholarship recipients in financial literacy, that alone was worth the price of admission. At home, not a status symbol penthouse, but a thoughtfully designed townhouse we'd renovated together. We changed into comfortable clothes and moved around the kitchen with practiced coordination, preparing dinner side by side. Remember when we had a chef for this? Richard commented, chopping vegetables with skill he developed at the cooking classes we'd taken together. And neither of us knew how to boil water, I added, stirring the risotto. I like this better, he said simply. Me too. Over dinner, we discussed academy expansions, Richard's sustainable housing initiative, and my upcoming keynote at the International Design Conference. The conversation flowed without the power dynamics or hidden agendas that had once characterized our marriage. After the meal, Richard disappeared briefly, returning with a small blue box. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "I thought we agreed on no gifts." "It's not exactly a gift," he explained, setting it before me. "More of a symbol." Inside was a key, old-fashioned and ornate. "I don't understand," I admitted. "It's the original key to the Lancaster building," he explained. "The headquarters my grandfather built that my father expanded, and I was supposed to inherit. The building we sold to fund the academy." I turned the heavy key in my hand. "Why give me this now?" "Because 3 years ago, I tried to lock you out of what I thought was my legacy. I didn't understand that a true legacy isn't a building or a name or an inheritance." His eyes held mine steadily. "It's what you build with your own hands and heart. What you earn rather than what you're given." "We've both learned that lesson," I acknowledged softly. "I wanted you to have this as a reminder, not of what we lost, but of what we found instead." I placed the key on the table between us. "Should we frame it? Put it in the academy lobby as a conversation piece?" He smiled. "I was thinking we could melt it down. The metal is high quality, could be reforged into something new." "Like what?" "Whatever we want," he said. "That's the point, isn't it? Taking the past and transforming it into something that serves the future." Later, as we stood on our modest balcony overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal that had sparked not destruction but transformation. The revenge plot that had evolved into redemption. "Happy anniversary, Elena," Richard said quietly. "Happy anniversary," I replied, resting my head against his shoulder. Not the gesture of a corporate wife maintaining appearances, but the genuine connection of equals who had earned their way back to each other. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Don't forget tomorrow's board meeting. Also, can your mother-in-law really teach my design class next week? The students are obsessed with her." I smiled, typing back. "Confirmed. Vivian's already preparing her lecture on status versus substance. What I wish I'd known about true value." Richard read the exchange over my shoulder and laughed. If someone had told me 3 years ago that my mother would become a beloved design instructor preaching against materialism. "Life takes unexpected turns," I agreed. "Speaking of which," he said, suddenly serious, "there's something we should discuss." "What is it?" "The Youth Center Board nominated you for a National Community Impact Award. The ceremony's next month in Chicago." "That's wonderful for the center, but why this serious face?" He hesitated. "The Lancaster Holdings building in Chicago, the one property we kept from the old company, needs renovation. I was thinking we could turn it into another academy location." "Richard, that building was your grandfather's first major acquisition. You always said it was untouchable." "Nothing is untouchable," he replied. "Not anymore. And honestly, I can't think of a better use for it than creating opportunities for others." I studied my husband's face, no longer the entitled executive who had tried to cut me out of his will, but a man who had learned that giving opportunities created more lasting value than hoarding assets. "Transforming the Lancaster legacy one building at a time," I mused. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more certain," he said firmly. "Besides, the Chicago market needs our sustainable approach. It's good business and good karma." I laughed at his use of the word. Karma. That's what I was counting on when this all started, you know. That justice would find its way to the Lancasters. And did it? I considered the question, thinking of Edward and Vivian teaching values they'd once scorned, of Richard finding purpose in creating rather than acquiring, of myself discovering strength I never knew I possessed. Not in the way I expected, I admitted, but maybe in the way we all needed. To karma, then, he raised his water glass in a toast. And to unexpected gifts. As we clinked glasses, I thought about the key sitting on our dining table, a symbol of locked doors and inherited privilege now destined to become something new and purposeful. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't watching your enemies fall. It's watching them rise to become better than they were before. And rising alongside them, transformed by the very fire that was meant to destroy you. To unexpected gifts, I echoed. And to the one I never saw coming, the gift of starting over. 5 years to the day after that fateful anniversary eve, I stood on the stage of the National Design Impact Awards, the spotlight warm on my face as I prepared to accept the Lifetime Achievement Award. At 45, I was the youngest recipient in the organization's history. The audience, a sea of industry leaders, students from our academies, and family both chosen and blood, watched as images of Elena Design's projects flashed across the massive screen behind me. The Wilson Theater restoration, sustainable housing developments in 3 states, our flagship academies, and community centers that had transformed once neglected neighborhoods. The true measure of design isn't in its aesthetic appeal, I began, my voice steady with the confidence of earned wisdom. It's in its ability to transform spaces, communities, and most surprisingly, people. From my vantage point, I could see Richard in the front row, his expression a mixture of pride and love that still caught me off guard sometimes. Beside him sat Edward and Vivian, now fully dedicated to the Academy's mission, their former lives as social elites seemingly from another lifetime. 5 years ago, I continued, I faced a betrayal that should have broken me. Instead, it broke open possibilities I had never imagined. Catherine gave me a subtle thumbs up from her seat, remembering those early days when revenge had been my only motivation. They say success is the best revenge, I said, scanning the rapt faces before me. But I've learned that transformation is the best response to betrayal. Not just transforming your circumstances, but allowing the experience to transform you, and sometimes, if you're very fortunate, those who wronged you as well. In the second row, Marcus sat with his wife and the board members of our foundation. In the rows behind them were students from our academies, future designers who would carry forward the values we had struggled to learn. The journey from that night to this stage wasn't a straight line, I acknowledged. It was a winding path through anger, determination, success, and eventually, something I never expected to find again, genuine connection. I glanced at Richard, who nodded slightly, encouraging me to share our truth. The husband who once tried to write me out of his will now co-leads an organization dedicated to lifting others up. The in-laws who dismissed my career now teach students that value isn't determined by wealth or status. And I, the woman who plotted revenge over champagne in an empty storefront, discovered that success without purpose is as hollow as inheritance without earning. I paused, looking down at the award in my hands. This recognition isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who helped transform a revenge plot into a mission of purpose. It belongs to the students who trusted our academies with their dreams, to the communities who partnered with us to revitalize forgotten spaces, and yes, even to the family who once rejected me and then found the courage to rebuild alongside me. I could see Vivian discreetly wiping away tears, the former ice queen now unafraid to show genuine emotion. The greatest design challenge I've ever faced wasn't a building or a space. It was redesigning relationships that seemed damaged beyond repair. It was finding a blueprint for forgiveness, not the kind that forgets harm done, but the kind that builds something new on a stronger foundation. The room was silent, hanging on every word, the story of personal transformation resonating far beyond our industry achievements. As designers, we know that constraints often lead to our most creative solutions. The constraints of betrayal, loss, and having to start over forced me to design a life I never would have imagined, one richer, more authentic, and ultimately more fulfilling than the life that was taken from me. I looked directly at Richard as I continued. 5 years ago, my husband cut me out of his will on our anniversary eve. It was a gift I didn't recognize at the time, the gift of freedom to build my own legacy instead of living in the shadow of someone else's. With a deep breath, I delivered the closing words I had carefully crafted. So if you're facing a betrayal, a setback, or a door closed in your face, remember this. Sometimes our greatest transformations begin at our lowest moments. Sometimes being cut out is actually being set free. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who try to write you out of their story become supporting characters in the far better story you write for yourself. The standing ovation was immediate and overwhelming. As I made my way back to our table, Richard enfolded me in an embrace that felt like coming home, not to a place, but to a truth we had both finally discovered. Later that evening, we hosted a celebration in our hotel suite, surrounded by the people who had been part of our improbable journey. Catherine raised her glass in a toast to Elena, who turned lemons into a whole damn lemonade empire. Laughter rippled through the room, but Edward stepped forward with his own toast. To second chances, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And to the woman who had every reason to destroy us, but chose to challenge us to be better instead. As the night progressed, I found myself on the balcony with Vivian, watching the city lights below. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For seeing potential in the very people who failed to see it in you." She turned to face me directly. "Richard was right, you know. That anniversary night was the best thing that ever happened to this family." "It was certainly the most transformative," I agreed. "I've been thinking about legacy lately," she continued. "Not the kind we tried to protect with wills and prenuptial agreements, but real legacy. I look at our students, at the communities we've helped revitalize, and I realize this is what will outlast us. Not bank accounts or social standing, but positive impact." That's quite a journey from the woman who once judged me for focusing on my career instead of planning charity galas, I observed with a smile. "We were so blind," she admitted, protecting emptiness while missing everything of real value. Inside, Richard was deep in conversation with academy graduates now leading their own firms, his passion for mentorship evident in every gesture. He caught my eye through the glass doors and smiled, a private moment of recognition between two people who had traveled from betrayal to partnership. A week later, we gathered at the original Elena Design Studio, now a historic landmark in its own right, for a more intimate ceremony. The original beach house key, reforged into a sculpture representing transformation, was being installed in the lobby. The plaque beside it read, "From closed doors come new pathways. From betrayal comes reinvention. From endings come beginnings." Richard stood beside me as the sculpture was unveiled, his hand warm in mine. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been such a fool that night?" he asked quietly. "Sometimes," I admitted. But then I look at everything that grew from that moment, not just Elena Designs, but who we've all become, and I can't bring myself to wish it undone. He nodded thoughtfully. "The greatest irony is that in trying to protect the Lancaster legacy by cutting you out, I nearly destroyed it. You saved us by refusing to save us on our terms." "Maybe that's the truest design principle of all," I suggested. "Transformation can't be imposed from outside. It has to come from within, from necessity and vision combined." As we prepared to leave, a young student approached, one of our first scholarship recipients, now graduating with honors. "Ms. Elena," she said hesitantly, "I wanted to thank you, not just for the scholarship, but for showing us that setbacks can become setups for something greater." "Carry that forward," I told her, squeezing her hand. "That's how legacy really works." Later that night, Richard and I sat in our garden, reviewing plans for the next academy location, a former Lancaster Holdings office building in Europe being repurposed to bring our mission international. 5 years, he mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, and sometimes like yesterday. "Both are true," I replied. "The people we were died that night. Who we've become has been forged in the 5 years since." "Do you ever miss the simplicity of revenge?" he asked with a knowing smile. It was certainly less complicated than redemption. I laughed. Occasionally. But revenge is a finite game. Once you've won, it's over. I gestured to the plans before us, to the home we'd built together, to the relationship forged through fire. This is infinite. Always evolving, always challenging us to be better. To infinity, then, he raised his glass. And beyond. I clinked mine against it. As the stars appeared above us, I reflected on the complete circle we had traveled, from a marriage of expectations to a partnership of equals, from inheritance to creation, from betrayal to trust. The greatest revenge wasn't in watching the Lancasters fall. It wasn't even in my own success. It was in the transformation of us all, the unexpected alchemy that turned betrayal's lead into the gold of purpose. Sometimes life's most painful cuts are actually setting us free. Sometimes being written out of someone else's story is the universe's way of telling you to write your own. And sometimes, the greatest gift comes wrapped in the guise of your deepest heartbreak, if you have the courage to open it and see what's truly inside. The legacy worth having isn't the one you inherit or the one you build alone. It's the one you craft from the broken pieces, with hands made stronger by having to start again. In the end, my husband cutting me out of his will didn't diminish me. It liberated me to discover my true value, one that could never be quantified in a legal document or measured in dollar signs. And in that discovery, I found not just success, but something far more precious, the authentic self I might never have known had everything gone according to plan. Some gifts come disguised as rejections. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who try to erase you from their story end up as cherished characters in the far greater story you were always meant to write.